Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Financial Statement Analysis to Journal Reviews with Excel Tools. My name is Jim Kaplan. I'm founder of AuditNet, and with us today is my colleague and friend Rich Lanza, an ACL and audit software expert. Today's webinar is a collaboration between AuditNet and auditsoftware.net in delivering training series focusing on audit software. We're glad you could join us today. I'll be moderating the webinar. A little bit about myself for those of you who don't know me. I'm the founder of AuditNet with a background as a chief audit executive, Internet for Auditors pioneer, and an auditor who believes and promotes the use of technology for audit. The next slide provides you with some information about AuditNet. Before we proceed to today's, that's slide about me. And there's a slide about AuditNet. Before we proceed to today's material and introducing our guest presenter, Rich Lanza, I'd like to go through a few important housekeeping points. The webinar is being recorded, and after the conclusion you will receive a link to the recording. You will get the email notification with the instructions for viewing the recording. That may take 5 to 7 days as we have to upload it and make sure that everything is formatted properly. We also have an evaluation questionnaire that you'll see at the end of the webinar. Your feedback is very valuable, so please take a minute or two to complete the survey. In addition, because the webinar qualifies for CPE credits, we will be putting up polling questions relating to the material covered in compliance with NASBA rules. The question period will remain open for about a minute, so it's important that you respond quickly. Those answering the questions will receive their CPE certificate by email within 7 to 10 business days. This applies only to the live session as we're unable to offer CPE for the recorded webinar. We will take your questions during the webinar. Submit your questions via the chat window at the lower right-hand box on your screen. Type your question and press return to send it. Any question we're unable to answer by the end of the webinar, we will answer directly within 48 hours. If you're having trouble with the webinar software, check to see if Java is enabled and whether you have any pop-up blockers disabled. If you're still not able to get the webinar to function, log out and log back in again. You can always join us on the audio portion and listen over the phone. So the next slide provides some information about disclaimer. I'm not going to read that. That was sent out to everyone who's registered for the webinar this morning, so you can take time to read that yourself. At this point, I'd like to turn the floor over to Rich Lanza and let him get started on today's webinar. We have a lot of material to cover, and I know Rich is just itching to get going here. Rich?
Great. Thanks a lot, Jim, and thanks everybody for coming today. You know, I really like journal entry testing because it's something that I've done for a long time, but also it's something that everybody has access to the data for. So, you know, over all the years that I've been doing this, I've done a lot of payables analytics, and general ledger is always number 2. With that said, you know, looking forward to kind of bringing to bear everything that I know about this topic from a audit perspective, but also even from a you know, just in finding money, hopefully within the organization. So you know, with that said, I was going to jump into the learning objectives, and the learning objectives, we have quite a bit to do, and what I wanted to do is kind of start out with an overall summary of just, you know, analytics within the general ledger, and it's a little more general. We're not getting into Excel yet, but then I'm going to be jumping into Excel and doing quite a bit of actual, you know, case study type analytics. So, you know, after the first polling question, you know, in essence, we'll be doing a lot of analytics from that point forward. And not only will we do kind of the standard tests that probably you're used to, but as we get into that second bullet there, I want to kind of look at your general ledger from a you know, from a multiple perspective point of view, so to try to summarize it in a way. So not just tests like, you know, weekend journal entries or round journal entries, you know, but beyond that to other things. I also want to take a look at how the general ledger can provide like a roadmap of your accounts and really try to understand by journal entry what accounts are being hit and then what type of account sequences are being hit. So that's where we get a little more advanced. We'll then start taking a look at you know, the general ledger keywords and try to think about how we can kind of search those keywords. We'll be graphing that as well, and I like in the summaries that we perform to kind of think about how can we graph it, because I find the visual effect is always kind of creates that wow effect with people. And last but not least is scoring, and I find that there, as you're going to feel at the end of this 2 hours, there are a lot of reports, and sometimes it's hard to really figure out, of the 20 reports we're going to run, which ones are good. So what scoring does is it allows you to kind of combine all those reports together so that you can actually get it into, into that analysis. So with that, I wanted to kind of jump into the overall general concepts, and how do the audit concepts in the GL relate to analytics. So from an overall audit planning perspective, what I try to do for the general ledger, if you can do it, is to try to get all of the data across your organization. I mean, it may exist within one, let's say SAP installation, or it might be in Oracle, but it may also be spread out throughout various types of ERP systems. If you could try to get the data, especially from the external auditors who normally are getting it anyway, so like quarterly they're getting this data usually. So this is a way to kind of grab that data, even if you're not going to use it, and be able to do something with it at some point. If you didn't use it at that quarter end, but at year end you do this big analytic, that's a key thing. And I usually will ask a group of people, how many people get the general ledger data for the external auditor? So you're in the process of getting the data, and everyone's hand goes up, and then I say, how many people keep it? And then everyone's hand goes down. They seem to sort of throw it out once going to the externals, and I think keep that stuff. Again, it's great big data to play with. What I then do is kind of run a series of tests, maybe 20 tests across each location, and our goal here is to try to almost like score the locations and figure out which one is the best one or more ripe to take a look at. What we then try to do is even see where we might be able to kind of get these toolkits down at a local level. Some of the reports we run, I like to actually give to a CFO or controller, and maybe on the webinar today even there are financial people, because I do work with financial people directly, because they may have been bit by a fraud years ago, and now this is their proactive way of kind of getting ahead of it and taking a look for some of these things. So I do feel whatever you build, try to share it a bit with management. You don't want to give them your audit plan, but I think to give them a few reports to check it out is good, and make it repeatable as well. So in looking, what are we trying to do here? What I work with a lot of audit departments that don't have audit programs. It's kind of interesting where we do work together, but yet the audit program kind of gets built on the fly. And I find, with that said, I'm not saying that's the best approach, but it's something where by us looking at the data, I almost don't need an audit program at times. I mean, it's something where I can just look for unusual activity and give people these events or transactions that they could look at and say that this is very interesting. We could also, just now from an auditor point of view, just kind of really check like unauthorized enters. Do we have people in there that shouldn't be entering journal entries? And then also just reconciling the activity. I mean, when you get the GL, normally the externals do this test for you, so you might be able to get it from them, even just to take a look at it and share it, or at least look at it and see how they did it. But that would just give you the completeness over the data. And I think, again, as an overall concept, that's one not to forget. Of all the detailed analytics we're going to do today, I think one of the top tests that you want to do is just making sure that their trial balance, the difference between the beginning and ending trial balance equals the detailed general ledger in the middle. Now, I'm a big cost-saving type person, and feel that for the most part there are a lot of payments that are made to vendors that really shouldn't have been made, or were made in excess of what they should have been made for, and this is a way to test for it. I mean, the general ledger is a way to take a look, and we're going to talk about this and kind of show you some examples. And these are the top areas that I generally look in, because they're areas that have grown into audit areas where there are actually businesses for each one of these divisions, and we're able to kind of which basically means that there's some issues there because if there weren't issues in the way utilities were processed or leases were processed, we wouldn't have auditors that exist for that area. So it's something where I like to look at the spend and make sure that I'm looking at these areas, maybe even try to see how I can audit these areas potentially myself or bring in a partner to save money for the company. And a big goal here, aside from finding errors and finding fraud like we're looking at here, I like to save the company money because at the end of the day, that is something that they usually remember more so than the fraud or some of these other things that they almost want to forget about. Like those are bad memories. These are all the different types of fraud. Over in the top right corner, I can't really scroll into it, but that top right corner is financial statement fraud, and I think that's really where we're focusing mostly today when we think about the general ledger and what we're trying to do here. I think for the most part, a lot of it is financial statement fraud. But what I'm finding interesting from a big data perspective is that a lot of the systems out there from a SAP or Oracle perspective, actually SAP definitely, I think even JDE to a large extent, and Oracle, they have the information from the subledger in the general ledger for a lot of the transactions. Not all of them, but a lot. And that allows you to identify, any sort of, let's say, for example, the vendor numbers are now attached to all of the transactions in the general ledger. That gives you an ability to kind of do a little bit of a vendor audit in a way and start to look at the spend by vendor and et cetera. So these are things where even though, again, it's the general ledger, it really does have a lot of detailed information and that shouldn't be forgotten. But again, when we think about fraud, I think we're mostly looking at the financial statement area. Okay. Continuing on, with the fraud concept and things to think about from a really high level, the SEC named the CEO or CFO for some level of involvement in 89% of fraud cases, which was up from the 97 study. So this was done, I believe, in 2010. Excuse me, and the link is there and as well. But if you type in COSA.org, you really can find everything. It's actually interesting to look at both of them. Another key note is that revenue fraud accounted for 60%. And, what I find, and it's up as well, and what I find is when you're looking at, when I'm looking at the general ledger, revenue and income statement impact of every journal entry is really interesting. Like every journal entry that has a revenue aspect to it, we should be pulling out and taking a look at, even just to understand the nature of all the entries, because that's really where it happens. I mean, you'll basically have this one sort of weird one debit, one credit entry for 1.8 million or something, and it's done right at year end, and it helped them kind of make it, to get over that quarter or year end sort of profit margin expectation. Okay, with all that said, when I'm taking a look at the data, it's sometimes hard to see the CEO and CFO in there. Like they generally don't post entries themselves, but I think it's something to think about if you do see them in there. And then also definitely look at the revenue areas as well. So I'm thinking, how do I make this an analytic? That's how we pull it. This also an article from WorldCom, great article. It's back in 2002, so it's a little while back. And Cynthia Cooper, who I know, I believe is still a speaker quite a bit on controls. What I found really interesting is she worked with a fellow, I believe his name was Gene Morse, and it's right in there. And in the beginning, he kind of found some strange entries, and it was just interesting to read the story because it really went through the whole process of how they found the fraud, and how there was a little bit of kind of static in trying to get the data and pulling it together and all that. They had to come in the middle of the night and do this analytics. It was very hush hush kind of stuff. but you know, using analytics, they found all of really the WorldCom fraud. So I'd like to always mention that, and it was in, I believe it was in general ledger type activity. Okay, right about that time, kind of interesting, about a year later, 2003, the AI CPA came out with a practice alert on journal entries. So, you know, Gene had an effect, or maybe this was in the works already, but this is something to look up. It's a practice alert. You know, you can type in practice alert AI CPA 2003-02, and I'll try to include it in the files, actually. I'll try to remember this. We didn't like list it as a file, but I know I have it, so I'll try to, I wrote down a note to myself. What I'll do is data files, of course, for almost everything you see today will be provided to you so that you can get them and play with them afterwards, and there will be a video as well, so I just noting that while we note this file. What's really cool about this article, though, is it listed about 10 or 12 types of journal entry tests that you could perform, and I think every one of them I'm talking about today, so I mean, it's like I think we have it covered, but they're pretty simple, round dollar journal entries, weekend journal entries, you know, entries that were, you know, sort of at year end or right after year end, adjustments that you know, corrected for previous year ends, that kind of thing. So, but a good article, definitely take a look at, and I think there was some, you know, response there to the WorldCom fraud in writing that, but I'm not sure. Okay, taking a look at financial statement indicators, I am probably as bad as everyone else at doing this, truly, but I know what to look for, and I'm providing you a lot of statistics on this. But it is something that I haven't spent as much time with in kind of, you know, taking balance sheets and income statements and lining them up and doing this like horizontal and vertical analysis of over time. And I think it's a great thing to do. I think the external auditors do it quite a bit. And then for internal auditors, I think it would be a great exercise, but maybe difficult to do. With that said, and kind of getting to the other potential files that we could be talking about today, or that I'll be sending you, hold on. This, I'm just going to carry over a file that you can see in a second here. There we go. Okay, so here's the matrix. What I did, and this is going back a while, but I read a lot of books on this topic. It was very kind of intriguing to me. I took all of the, I don't know if you remember this slide from just a second ago. I tried to take all of the major financial statement fraud schemes, which are, you know, in this right-hand top corner here, and for that, I tried to find the various ratios that would align to that. And not only ratios, but even like, you know, increase or decrease. So like if we have an increased quick ratio or current ratio, that can be a sign of overstated revenue, because the theory goes you're going to create a bogus accounts receivable, and it's going to sit there. But at the same time, and I believe the days sales outstanding will also increase. So it's something where, you know, because this old invoice is kind of sitting out there. So, you know, these are all the theories here. I tried my best to not only list for you the various ratios that are listed here with a comma, that kind of aligns to this other spreadsheet. So I have this other spreadsheet here, it's a tab, excuse me, and it has all the ratios and does like a technical description and a calculation, and I really did my best here to try to explain, you know, why should what should we be looking for, and why are we looking at this particular type of ratio. Again, I give it out there. I hope you use it in some way. I've used it in some extent over time, but I have to admit I haven't used it much. But just a small funny story here is when I started one job recently, maybe about 5 years ago, the CFO said to me, I can't understand it because our business is growing and our accounts payable is shrinking. And it just, like, from a value perspective, every year it kind of is shrinking, and yet our, you know, our sales are going up, 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 up. And it doesn't make any sense to me why that, would happen. And sure enough, I found that there were a lot of receivables that were within the accounts payable that were netting the payables. So and he was right. Like, you know, his eye from above was able to kind of see that, but yet, you know, he really needed the details, and we found all the credit memos and such that were truly receivables. One question, will the matrix you be getting this? You will be getting this one. There's only one spreadsheet that I'll note that you won't be getting, and it's just because it has some relatively proprietary info in there, and I just didn't want to give that one out. But everything else you will get. So, but thank you for those questions. I kind of see them coming in. Feel free to post questions as you go. I kind of watch the screen as best as I can, but we will be shortly kind of stopping for a for a quick polling question. But with that said, I didn't want to spend too much time on this, other than to say you have it, and feel free to make use of it. I think it is something that will work for you. Getting back into the presentation, just wanted to note a few other things. This is, AuditNet has a wonderful slew of journal entry type programs, and I believe there's even one that Jim pulled together related to this webinar, but again, this is within AuditNet, and that's where you can find a lot of audit steps and procedures that you could automate. So it's reconcile, let's say the detailed subledger to the general ledger or something like that is just a general test. But then you could think about how you could analytically do that versus maybe manually doing it in spreadsheets or something. With all that, another book out there that I wrote, I think it's 10 years old now, Proactively Detecting Fraud. It's for the IIA. I make no money on it. It was a research paper, but it was great in that I had a lot of fun in thinking about, just like with the financial statement indicators, I kind of had to think about all of the fraud types and the types of reports you would run. So this has a list of reports as well. This is giving you some ideas of payroll reports, but you get an idea of what's in there. And hopefully that could be a good memory jogger for you as well. This was a list of types of entries that are kind of standard risk factor type reports. I mean, we're going to talk more in detail and go through this in a few minutes, one by one in Excel. But I kind of want to just have a slide here just generally to say, I think what it tends to boil down to these audits, for all the analytics and summaries and graphs that we're going to do, I think at the end of the day we end up running kind of these sort of peculiar type reports, entries that are hitting revenue but are not offsetting accounts receivable and cash. And that's like WorldCom, I believe. I mean, it's something where they were capitalizing the revenue. So, that's a big one with the auditors. Taking a look at kind of manual journal entries versus automated ones, weekends, things that are kind of at a period end and you're trying to, bump up your numbers, accounts that are above average, round dollar multiples, etc. We're going to go through these in more detail, but I just wanted to give you an idea of the fact that I think these audits do tend to boil down to these reports. The one thing that I'm going to add then is, that I don't have a slide for right here, is I think one of the goals then is to score these reports, to kind of add together these 15 reports and say, of these, that journal entry showed up on 8 of 10. We should look at that because that's really weird, that it's happening. And, one of the things especially is the keyword analytics work that's in there that we're going to spend some time on, and there's a lot of talk and surveys and webinars around that topic that I think you can utilize in the general ledger. Okay, with all that, it's a good time to kind of launch our first polling question, and just waiting for that. So who has involvement in close to 90% of all financial statement fraud? Is it internal audit, CEO or CFO, account manager, or the COO? And just a note, we do break for these polling questions for NASBA compliance. You do need to answer them. We really ask that you answer all of them. I know Jim went through this, but this is kind of the polling question time. This is a great time to ask questions. I stop. I'm able to kind of take a little break and look at the screen a little better. So if you do have any questions on what we're doing so far, feel free. And, otherwise what we do when we come back, and it's usually about 90 seconds or so or 2 minutes later after we start the polling question, is we then will kind of go into more detailed data analytics around the general ledger. So almost all of you have voted. I'll just leave it out open for another 20 or 30 seconds. And thank you. Okay, well, let's let me close this poll and share that with everybody. And yes, 88% of you were correct. The CEO or CFO has involvement in most of the frauds. It was almost 90%. All right, let me hide that. And on to specific journal entry and other ledger analytics. Oh, and let me just check here. I think and one of the questions, just to answer it because we're at question time, from a data file point of view, the data files will be shared within about a week. I think it'll be about 5 days though, and what we do is we put the video up online, and then we send the video, or excuse me, the files as well as your CPE. And again, I'm going to really try to get it out within the next few days, but I would say by Friday, hopefully at the latest. So do bear with us. Okay. Continuing on here. Okay. So on the specific journal entry analytics, I was asked once, how do you do data analytics? How do you find things, and you kind of walk in and quickly can pinpoint stuff. And I like to take this journalistic approach that there's the who, what, when, where, and why to any situation, and we need to kind of look at that and understand how it fits. So summarizing data by all these perspectives is really key. And just to go a little bit deeper into this graph for a second, essentially there's more data mining questions that you'll ask, like just summarizing it, but then there's actual queries that you run that are actual questions. Really, these reports here, where they're more of like a specific type, those reports there. So like more of a specific report that you're actually running. Okay, and that's a query. And I think, a lot of the analytics ends up being more of a direct control, like you're testing, should that person have access? Yes, or no. Whereas control circumvention is almost like the WorldCom fraud, and I'm not a pro on it, but it was more where they were posting a lot of entries that were under approval limits. So it's something where, they probably had the approval limit for it, and they could post the entry, so the direct control was fine. But because they were posting so many of them, anyone running that report, how many entries are right below the approval limit, that's where control circumvention testing kind of comes into play. So a lot going on in that picture, but hopefully it makes sense to you. I do find from a trending point of view, one fraud we found very quickly was just summarizing the general ledger data by day. When we did that, we identified one day that, just looked really weird. And sure enough, it was some management of earnings that somebody was doing, and they were cleaning it up. That was like the cleanup entry. So that was the thread that brought us to all of the others. And I find in travel and entertainment, not to get on a different topic, but just trending in travel and entertainment is probably the best way to find fraud. Just looking at like director levels and saying, whoever's in this director level, how many people are above, let's say, $100,000 in T&E spend, and how many are below it? And it's very interesting. You'll just find somebody who just completely pops out of the norm, and it just doesn't make sense. And then you research more and find out that they too are committing fraud. So the trends have a lot to it. I think you can find quite a bit there. What I find too is, from a trending point of view, to then look for money. And we're going to now start getting into the specifics, but by starting out by looking for money, because a lot of times people will almost want you to find money before they'll move forward on a project, or find the value for it. And by doing a bit of cost recovery or analysis of your spend, you might be able to do that, just coming up with some good ideas. What I generally do is get the accounts payable detailed distribution, which really is the general ledger in a lot of ways. It ends up becoming like the general ledger version of accounts payable. And that data file is the only data file that I won't be giving you, because it does have some proprietary stuff, and I just didn't want to put that in there for public display. But you'll see how very easily and quickly you could do this yourself if you had the data. So let's, with that said, as you can look at your slides, you'll notice that the next like 2 or 3 are very specific tests. And what we're going to do is I'm going to start out with the distribution analysis, which is more of like a pivot table, analytic, and then what we're going to do is work from there to the actual specific tests that are also a part of the equation. So just bear with me. Let me get this Excel file over to you. Just moving files here. There we go. Okay, so this is a file that you will be getting, and let me just get the distribution sample as well. And we're going to be working most of our tests within this general ledger sample file. And for the most part, I just wanted to show you that that file is very similar to this file that I'm about to open up, which is the distribution sample file. There we go. So in looking at the distribution data, let me, maybe that's a little, hopefully you can read that. You know, for the most part, we have kind of vendor number, account number, description, amount, debit or credit, it's negative or positive, who entered it, and then some information over here, which we just don't need, you know, for right now. What I did was I created a pivot table of this data, and let me just get rid of this for a second here. Okay, so when we look at the other data file that I will play with as well, this is the kind of the normal general ledger file. Again, it has like a journal entry number, which, you know, could be vendor number in this case, but it's journal entry number, account number, debit, credit, and then we have a few other fields, but we have the date as well. Going back to here, I didn't have a date in here, but what I wanted to do is kind of just simply show you how we can find some money. You know, so that's sort of the first test, in my opinion, is see how this thing can pay for you. By going to your insert menu in the data file, no matter, you know, which worksheet that you're in, and clicking pivot table, it'll do a pretty good job. It you know, should do a great job and collect all of the data that's for analysis. So the 8,013 rows are going to be imported in, and you say yes to that pivot table. Then I have there's a few different ways to show this. Just kind of drag this over here. So we had our fields that were, you know, back in the distribution test field area, and what I wanted to show is that you can pull the account number into the row area, and you can actually take that back. Let me just kind of jump to the chase here. We'll pull in the account description, and then I'm going to pull in the vendor number, and I'm going to pull it under the account description. So notice how it puts it to the right. It's within the account description. And then we're going to take the distribution amount and put that in the value section. Now, that number is okay looking. It could look better. So I'm going to go into the sum of distribution amount and click the value field settings, go to the number format, and I can change that to whatever I'd like. Now, that, you know, the way to get here, you know, there are various ways to get here in pivot tables, and just trying to show you a few things in pivot tables that we'll expand on in a few minutes. The number format is part of the value field settings that you can click there. You can do a lot of things in here. I mean, you can count and average, and we'll be playing with some of these other features in a minute. But right now I'm just trying to change that. The other key, though, is that at the top, whenever you click on a pivot table, so if I click here, notice, I don't know, my ribbon changes up at the top, Excel. But if I click on any item, it then brings up this different ribbon, the pivot table tools. Now, within the table tools, you have a design function where you're able to kind of change what things, you know, look at like from a design point of view. But then there's the analyze function. And what okay, so it's over here. You know, we have sort of the fields, and they're kind of talking about what's being summarized, and you can click on the field settings and change that just like we did here. But I really like to note that this toolbar has like everything. You know, if you can, if you ever have trouble and you're trying to like right click and find stuff, this sort of has if you need to change the data source, you know, etc. There's all these things you could do. Okay, the main thing that I was trying to do here in my analytic was try to see how many vendors I have for a given account number. So that was sort of my key. And you know, there's probably a lot of ways to do it. Personally, I can right-click here, by the way, and collapse. And I'm going to collapse the entire field, so kind of bring it down to that level. And now you can see you have all of the account descriptions over on the left-hand side, and then a variety of vendors down the right. Now, if I now expand every one of them, and just scroll out of the data. So now my data file becomes really, really, really small, like almost impossible to read. But when you're at the screen, you can very quickly kind of see one line item. And I'm just going to click on that and then go into it. Another thing people do, actually, they'll highlight things too, so that makes it easy. So we notice here we have only one vendor, $107,000 for this type of activity. So that's kind of interesting, and that's something where that might, could be a fraud or something where there's, only one vendor for that account. They kind of posted it there. So that's one thing to look for, even from like a fraud point of view. But then I like to look at, why do I have so many vendors for certain account numbers? So, for dues and publications, bad example. So we're going to collapse that one. But what you can do is go down here and literally start collapsing things. What you'll find are things like office expenses, which is here, has so much information in it. It becomes something where there's every type of vendor in here, and this is where a lot of times companies do go to some sort of a combined spend type vendor, such as Staples or Office Max or something like that. Okay, so partially, why do we do this account a description analysis here? Partially is to find vendors that are in a sole source type of a situation, but also partially to determine whether or not there's accounts that we might be able to source and do a better job at. With all that said, last but not least, to take a look at those categories of where there's auditors and try to align that to your data. So, going back to the accounts and kind of expanding, collapsing, and, collapsing the entire field, just to kind of go through that list and say, which one of these are leases or healthcare or what have you, and what is the spend going to that. The general ledger has all that information, so it's something that you can do, and hopefully this helped in just kind of understanding how to take a data file that we have here and build a variety of pivot tables, because now what we're going to do, just going back to my slides, let me just close this distribution sample. Going back to the slides here, I wanted to then jump into the more specific data analytics for the given data files that we have. So in the WHO, looking back at, what are the queries that we run and what type of analytics can we run here, what I like to, think about, and what we'll try to do here is kind of walk through each one of these and think about how can we, do each one of these tests within the data. First one there is summarizing by who, so we'll, do a pivot table by who and kind of look at that in one perspective. Also want to kind of take a look at maybe stratifying the data and understanding that, as well as maybe summarizing the data on the amount field. And why would we want to do that? I like to summarize on the journal entry amount field, just to say, how many journal entries have the same amount? And, again, very similar to, some of these frauds that have happened, is it something where you have almost like a repetitive over and over type of entry that's happening in the data. And these types of reports, as you can see, are more about the what of the transaction. What accounts is it hitting to? What is the size of the data? What is the amount? Okay, and then just looking at another slide here, before getting into the data a bit, we want to kind of summarize on the amount, which we'll do in a pivot tabling, and then we're going to sort it by high to low, obviously. I also like to look, though, and I note this, I like to look at ones that happen a lot. I also like to look at ones that happen almost like, not a lot, but almost like an average amount, but still they're happening more than once. You'd think a journal entry amount shouldn't be the same number all the time. But then I like to look at amounts that only happen once, so you really want to kind of look at, that. And what I usually, and this is where I have this fourth bullet there, score each item on a sliding scale. You might want to think about, is it unique that's weirder, or is it the fact that you have so many of them that's weird? I find the ones that you have a lot of entries for, a lot of amounts that are the same, it tends to be like a very similar kind of accrual entry that you're posting and taking off, and it happens every month. Whereas things that that happen once and are $18 million or something, that's the really weird stuff that you have to look at. So number ranking can definitely help there as well. Just from an analysis point of view, let's kind of dive into the data, and I'm going to start out with that number ranking because it's kind of interesting, and then we'll kind of stop for a second for questions. But give me a minute here, and excuse me. So what we have here is kind of the raw GL data. And what we can do very quickly is kind of set up another pivot table of this data. We'll assume it's right, and let me just kind of drag this over so you can see it. I'm going to take the journal entry, I'm going to take the debits and the credits, and you know what, for right now I'm just going to assume that the debits equal the credits. I know that's a test we'll do later, but I just want to kind of assume the debits equal the credits. Okay. By doing this, I'm going to take a copy of this data. So the way to do that, you hit your control key. So I'm just going to note this, your shift key, and then the star button, and you kind of hit all that at once. If you can do that in the pivot table, control shift star, which is the number 8 key, it'll essentially now take a look at all the data. Okay, so now that I have that, I'm going to kind of go over here, and I'm just going to paste that as a special. And by pasting special values, I'm able just to get the values here. I think it's okay if you had that filter mechanism on it, but personally, I'd rather just kind of do values. It makes me feel safer that the data hasn't been corrupted in any way. Okay, kind of same process. I'm going to highlight this data now. I'm not going to highlight the grand total at the bottom, and I'm going to insert another pivot table. So it's like a double pivot, right? And that pivot table now is of the actual amounts. So what I can do now is I can drag the amounts into the rows. So that has my amounts. And then I can drag the count, so that's summarizing the rows. And in my value, I could summarize it. I mean, that's one way to do it. But I'm going to go to Value Field Settings, kind of like how we did before. You can get there from the ribbon as well. Click Count. And I may even just do a number format while I'm here and make it look pretty. And I'll do it 0 decimal places with a comma. So you could do that. Looks a lot nicer. And now we have our count. Now that's, it's kind of interesting. I mean, you have all these weird amounts. There's, gosh, 2,500 amounts. So, okay, let me then sort that from large to small, but not by the amount, excuse me. In the more sort options, you can go descending by the count of that sum of the debit amount. So the debit amount was the detail value. We summarized it on journal entry, and now we're counting it. And you'll notice here we have $17,000 happening 6 times in the data. Not a lot of money, but it's still something where it's just odd. It's a round dollar journal entry. It's happening 6 times in the data, and it may, if we looked at it, how do we look at it? You then double click on the 6, on the values, and it'll bring up the detailed information that, which journal entries are kind of making that up. So that gets thrown to another data sheet or worksheet within Excel. But again, trying to show you how by summarizing the data in various ways, but first by distribution and account amount, but now just by the amounts themselves, can be a very interesting exercise. And I, again, now, taking this to the final level here, what I would probably say is, in looking at this data, I'm thinking about this. I almost want to take the summary. So what I can do is take that amount and try to put a sum in there as well. So, we have the 17,000 times 6, which is now the 102,000. So what I can do I'm going to now sort on that in a descending fashion. And now, what's kind of interesting, I have the one entry for 114,793,509. And that's interesting. I mean, it's something where you have some of these large entries that only happen, or the amount only happens once in the data. That's something to look at because it is unique. Okay, so with that, let me kind of launch the next polling question. It's our time for that. And what is an example of a what question in the general ledger analytic tests? Is it extract entries entered by an unauthorized user, identify weekend journal entries, summarize entry by account type, or summarize by who entered the entry? So what's like a what question? And, we keep these open for about 90 seconds, 2 minutes or so. We're doing well on time, from that perspective. And, what's going to continue is we're going to go over more specific reports now. Might get a little bit faster in the way that we're going through the reports. I'm kind of assuming you understand pivot tables by now. And I know a lot of people do know pivot tables in general. I'm getting more surprised. I used to not find people using pivot tables. And now it's like a no-brainer for a lot of people. But definitely take a look at that concept if you haven't. And then we'll get into more specific kind of keyword analytics and taking a look at more of the unique journal entry testing that we can do, which goes beyond just looking for unique amounts. We can look at other ways. And then graphing and scoring. So we have a lot still to go. But yet what's kind of good is these other concepts are a little bit smaller in the sense that each one is kind of like a 10-minute concept kind of thing. So I see most of you have voted. We're getting up on 2 minutes. Don't see any questions coming in. Hopefully, so far, everything's making sense to you. Okay, 93% of you have voted. Let me, I'll just keep it open for like another 5 seconds or so for those that haven't. And again, just trying to track it for NASBA compliance there. Again, yes, summarizing the entry by account type was the correct answer. Extracting by who entered it, the unauthorized user, those are who questions. The weekend journal entry would be more of a time, a when question. Okay, let me hide that. And we'll get back into the analytics. So again, using this raw data file, this journal entry data file, it's pretty simple, for at least playing around with and, kind of breaking it and such. I wanted to note, first off, we'd like to kind of summarize, and let me just to kind of speed this up. I had built an enter sum here, and the way I had done it, so this is built, and this will be in the data that you'll get. We basically have the years as well as in the columns we have who entered it, and then we have the count of how many of the journal entries, let's say, or how many journal entries were postings, excuse me, how many of the detailed postings were in the data. So there was like 20,000 detailed transactions. How many were entered by AC and DC and JL and etc. Now over here I have the date, and I don't know if I'm gonna really mess this up. I'm gonna take that out and try to put it back. Yeah. Okay, so what happened was I was playing around with this, and what you can do is you can right click, and this is a good concept to learn, and go ungroup. And I really should have kind of ungrouped it. Give me a second here. There we go. So by ungrouping it, it gives us kind of every date again. And this is when you looked back at the data had it kind of in a daily sort of fashion. One really good concept to learn from a date perspective is grouping. So you right-click and go group. Now, if you forget where this is, again, on the pivot table tools, you don't have to right-click in the data. You can just say group selection up at the top. And, you have a lot of options. I mean, you can go quarter, and let me try quarter and year. just to see how that works. Yeah, so that, we got a few years worth of data in here. I find that when you look at this table, it looks like gobbledygook. It's very difficult to look at. So, one way of getting around that is first to kind of go over to, I'm going to show you a more advanced concept, go over to that field settings, value field settings from before, right-click and click on that field, and go in the show values as. You could say either percentage of row total or percentage of column total or percentage of grand total. I think I'll do, let me try column total, see how that works. Yeah, I think that works. I mean, it's something where it's trying to give you a perspective of how many of the journal entries are being posted by person, and it's showing it more in a percentage form. Sometimes gives you like a better perspective of where maybe to look and where trends are, and like this one kind of jumps out at you, in relation to other people for that particular quarter, but for that person, it's not, it's not crazy. What is a little bit high though, whoops, is, sorry, I double clicked on it, is this 21%, and 16% for that person, so, looking down the column, you can kind of see, how have they grown or fizzled over time. Let me kind of change that back, and I think, let me just do value field settings, show value as. I'll just go back to the no calculation, but I wanted to show you that because I think that's interesting. When you graph this in a really cool way, and I created this graph, but I'll show you how I did it. This gives you an ability now to look at that gobbledygook of data and make a lot more sense of it. So it is something where, KD was in yellow, and you notice how the yellow bar here and the yellow bar there are very strange in relation to all the other bars, and such. Whereas when you're looking at it here, it's very difficult. Okay, so how do you make a graph? And we're going to have a section a little bit later on graphing, but I wanted to just kind of quickly note this because we showed you that graph. All you have to do is click on a pivot table, so click within the data, and then go to pivot chart. Now, there are a lot of options. You might even want to do kind of a, this clustered, stacked column, if you could see that. Stacked column works well because you kind of look in the stacking and look for things that are jumping out. But if you click all the way to the right, there's this 3D column one. And, depending on, I think I'm using Excel 2013, I believe. So this really kind of jumps out at you. But I believe when you work in 2010, you get like a blank screen at this point. You don't actually get the graph. But so you have to have faith and hit the OK button, and it'll build that chart. Now, what I did was I took this chart. Notice how this chart here and that chart there is a little bit different, right? It almost like, this is almost like a, I'm looking at it from above, and then this one here is, I'm looking at it more flat. What I can do is I can right-click on the graph, and I can say Move Chart. I'm going to move it, and I'm going to move it to its own kind of chart page. Now that I've done this, looking at kind of enterer's activity over time, I can right-click the chart again and say 3D rotation. Now, in the 3D rotation, you have an ability to kind of move the x-axis around, and it gives you some options, and then it also allows you to move the y-axis. So I don't know exactly what I had on that other chart. You can almost, I don't want to go too far here, but I mean, you can almost get to like a 90% y rotation where you're really, peering down above it. Hopefully that helps, and I do find the 3D graphing is really interesting, especially you can almost sit within the graph itself and kind of scroll around depending on what's hiding behind another. It's almost like what's hiding behind another building of data when you're looking at it. So that's all in 3D rotation that you can right-click and get to. Okay, so that's that. Getting back to the enterer. I find, just summarizing by enterer is sort of interesting, but definitely you want to look for unauthorized users, so people that aren't there. But what I find interesting is when somebody has like a lot of activity, or someone has no activity and they just have like one posting. So I don't have that in my data, but I think that's, what we're looking at here is sort of those trends around where people have almost like no postings and then they have a lot of posting. Okay. Now, just to change that graph really quickly, from from an analysis point of view, what I can do is just kind of change this to more of a sum. So now we're looking at the values, and I'll just kind of just to keep this quick here, we can then look at it like that. And this gives you a different perspective. I mean, now it looks like RL is the guy who's posting these weird entries in quarter one of 2000 or quarter two of 2013 and quarter four of 2013, but seems to have like no other activity. From a dollars and cents point of view. So value versus volume can be a really interesting thing as well. Okay, so this is a who analysis that also kind of brings into account the date-time analysis as well. The other date-time analysis, and I showed it before, but bear with me here. The other date-time analysis is just summarizing by day, and in just taking, bear with me here. I think these are all ones we were playing with. Hold on. So going back to the raw data, I can insert a pivot table, and I'm going to be taking a look now at the date field in my rows column, and this is an interesting thing to show you. And then let's say the debit amount for now, and actually we may as well just throw the credit amount as well. Now what's interesting is when I create another pivot table, a lot of times it's almost like tied to the last one or something, and it sort of, you have to ungroup it. So we talked about the grouping before. I find it almost like takes the properties of the last time you did this. So you just have to be careful of that when you're grouping and ungrouping. But okay, now that I've done that, I can now also pivot chart this data. And I could do a clustered column, but I'm going to just do that general kind of line chart analysis. And what's interesting is I think the debits equal the credits, so you'll see they kind of mirror one another. But what's interesting about just doing a time analysis, right? Like what this gives me that the enter sum didn't give me is just finding those days that look really weird. And it's amazing how out of 3 full years, about 1,000 or 1,100 days, you're looking at somewhere about like 5 or 6 or 10 that you need to go look at. That really had a lot of activity within that time frame. So, pivot tables, we could go all day on it probably, but definitely something to look at. Some of the other tests we talked about is just kind of looking at entries that are happening more in the quarter ends. So you might even want to let me just do one thing here in making this chart just a little bit better. We'll kind of blow up the axis a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. And you can see here this is kind of in June and June 12th, and let's imagine that they're an annual quarterly kind of company. Here we have in the third quarter of 2012 a pretty major spike, and in looking kind of towards the end of the year as well, having some sort of major spikes as well towards here. So looking at kind of year-end type analysis is also kind of interesting. What would be really interesting, and I'm just noting this and going back to a previous report we talked about, imagine if you were just looking at the revenue entries, so forget, the entire general ledger where it becomes almost like a wash, where you can't see anything. If you started to just pull out the journal entries or transaction activity for just revenue and then did a graph like this, that could lead to an entirely different graph because, again, revenue of maybe $50 million was posted here, and that's that little line here, and it's dwarfed by the fact that you bought some huge company, and it now kind of throws the graph off. Another way to analyze data, beyond kind of the who and the when that we've been talking about, is to kind of look more potentially at the what itself. And in looking at some of the what questions that you might want to ask, let me just kind of head back here. I like to stratify data as well as kind of look so let's just say from a stratification point of view, I'm just going to do this quickly today and say that this is an add-in that you can get for 30-day free trial. I think it's even much greater now. I think it's like 90-day or something free trial that you can get. And it's active data, and it has this really nice stratification. And I find if there's like one test to perform on any data, even if you could just stratify the data, that'd be key. What I like about this, even though there are ways to do it in Excel, what I like about the active data product, and Top Cats is very similar to this, where it has an ability in Excel to do this type of work. It gives you over on the left-hand side a lot of statistics about your data. What's the maximum value? $52 million that's sitting in there. What's the average value? 60,000. It's a lot of other stuff. But what you can do, and I'll just do this very quickly for our sake. You can I'm going to create 10. I'm going to make the interval. Yeah, I think we have too many. I tried to make like 100,000 and it stopped at one point. But our goal here is to then stratify that data and have the system kind of identify what are some of the really large entries, which are ones that are just kind of quite small. If you look at the data, what's really interesting is of all the transactions, most of them are under 100,000. So like 94% of the transactions are under 100,000, and they're making up 9% of the dollars. So when you look at the dollar perspective, 26% or 27% of the dollars are being made up by 19 journal entry, or 19 transactions, excuse me. So that's postings that are in the data. So I still kind of go back to, if you can stratify data, if you could do one thing, you're bound to find within there some interesting trends, and possibly even some trends that are below a limit. So you might say, well, $1 million is kind of our limit, and that's like right here. Maybe we look at all the entries that are 800,000, 900,000 as well, because that $1 million limit is big. Now, in this case of the data, I didn't plan this. In this case of the data, we don't have a lot going on in there. But if you had 195 entries that were happening in the 900,000 to million range, and your approval limit was $1 million, just the stratification report alone, could be enough for you to do something with it. So I'm going to cancel that, but I wanted to kind of show you another type of test from a what perspective, and get that stratify in there, because I think that's a really good one. I'm just going to head back to the slides just for a second here. And go into the fact that there are a lot of functions within Excel that can be really useful, and one of them being the mod function, which can identify round dollar journal entries. In my slide, you'll see a little bit later, I kind of put this in the why perspective, like why do we have round dollar journal entries? They could be estimates, that's normal, but you probably should look at the estimates because they're usually the weird ones. But there are other things like weekday to determine if it's a weekend or a day, which would be denoted with a 1 or a 7. And then there's like left and upper and absolute value and all that, which is helpful. So I just wanted to note those. Okay, so now looking at this next slide, we talked about some of these already, but I wanted to jump into the weekend analytic. I also think looking at holidays, if you know that they're holidays, is good, and weekends is good, but I find that the test isn't the best test because a lot of accounting departments work on weekends and holidays. From a time, what I don't have in my list here is looking for times that are weird. A lot of times computer systems save when the person signed in from a minute and second and hour perspective. And this is something where you can look at that as well. But I find accounting, the controller and others will sometimes work, late into the night. So it's not abnormal to see that. From a where perspective, getting down to that, I like to think about what are some of those problem accounts or suspense accounts that you should be looking at. But as I've said before, the revenue account, definitely take a look at that. 60% of financial statement fraud's happening there. Beat that up. Take a look at it. And then obviously, let me continue on. The why, looking at ones that are kind of strange from various perspectives. Let's say even what accounts are exceeding the average amount for that account, round dollar multiples. We're going to talk about key text searching in a bit, so I'll leave that one. But I want to kind of take some of these tests that I'm throwing up here on the slides and show you how to do them in Excel. So let me kind of, now that we're sort of done with the slides, let me head back to my Excel. There we go. Okay, so what I've done here is I've created a calculated field, and there's a lot going on here, quite frankly. So let me kind of add another column in here just to show you. So let's just say round difference, and I'll explain what that means in a second. I'm going to divide, I'm going to divide the total amount, excuse me, by 1,000. And let me kind of, the way to copy that down, I'll just double click and copy that all the way down. What I'm finding here, like, notice how this is 2,078 and 40, so that's right here, and the difference is $78.40. That's the mod. What the mod function does is it basically divides this by whatever you had. I put 1,000 in, and excuse me, if it is a round multiple, it'll be 0. The final kind of answer will be 0 in this field. So, but there's a bit of a problem, and that's why I make this if statement over here that I think we'll leave for you to kind of look at in the data. But it more or less is kind of determining if it's 0, we don't want to consider that round. So that's that, and let me show you what I mean in a second. So if I filter now to all the zeros, you'll notice that there are a lot of $1,000 journal entries. Remember the $17,000 that happened 6 times. It happened 6 times in one period, but it's happened even more times in other periods. This is really interesting. Okay, but with that said, notice how every journal entry that nets to 0, which again is kind of weird in itself that happens, but that also is a kind of it leads to this mod function having a 0. So I kind of do an if statement over here. I'm not going to waste your time with it, but it kind of calculates that is not what we're looking for. But I still find that that's really interesting. Why do we have journal entries that are 0? I never really thought about it till now. So that's one of the functions is the mod function in figuring out round dollar amounts and then round dollar journal entries, which also can take place. Okay. In this case, then, what I want to do is take a look at the weekday function. So let me get rid of my filter, and the weekday function will allow me to take a look at a date, and it gives me an answer of a 1 to 7. A 1 is, I believe, a Sunday, and a 7 is a Saturday. So that's kind of how it works. And day of week. And in essence, what we could do actually is, while we're here, let me unfilter, go insert pivot table. And I'm going to go on day of week. Oops. Well, yeah, there's lots of pivots we could do here, but I'm just kind of curious, day of week, and I'm just going to do maybe even the sum of amount. So, but let me just do this twice. So what I'm really kind of interested in more than anything else, and just going through what we've done a little quickly here, I think I want to just do it of the grand total. Okay. So in this case, I can kind of see what's happening by day, and it is interesting. 32% of transactions are happening on the weekend, which is a lot. It's sort of sample data. It's a little odd, but again, it might be interesting to take a look. Not only what entries are happening over the weekend, it could be normal system processing that's happening at a time where no one's around, like an inventory costing module or something like that. But it could be somebody kind of sneaking in at the middle of the night. What you could also do is kind of look at who's doing it. So these are some of the, now I'm getting crazy here, but these are some of the things that you can start to look at, probably even from a percentage point of view, and taking a look by person to say, how many entries am I entering in on weekends versus other times. And it might highlight, what I find is, in this case, you have two people that are obviously coming in a lot on the weekends, in relation to others that are, relatively low on the weekends. And even for this one, they're also high in this time frame as well. So they're high on the Sunday in relation to others, and also for the Saturday. So again, a lot of different ways to go with this, but I find that by doing some of these pivot tables, it allows you to very quickly pinpoint in on some dates and times that really need to be analyzed. Okay, well, at this point, what I wanted to do is continue on after a quick break here. I think what we want to do is just we'll go to the, well, I think, bear with me one second here, folks. Yeah, I just wanted to see, let me just go just a couple more minutes here on keywords, because I think it might be useful. And one of the tests that we had in here, I tried to talk about almost all those tests that we've had there. I didn't want to make it a one-for-one, but at the same time, cover a lot of the key ones. There's a lot of talk right now about keyword analytics and textual analytics, and what are we talking about here? Generally speaking, it's for the most part coming up with a database of suspicious words, and then looking through the entire table. But I even go one step further in saying, I think it's a great way to even just look at all the words in the table itself. And based on all the words, to try to identify trends within those words. So, for example, why is a certain word happening over and over again? As an example, like payroll accrual, that phrase happening in your data file. If that's happening 10 times more than anything else, it might kind of lead a CFO or controller to say, why do we have so many journal entries for payroll accruals? It just doesn't seem, it seems odd in relation to everybody else. But again, these are some of the things that the word analytics can do for you. What I find is that it's really kind of interesting to be able to align the keyword analytics to the fraud triangle. The fraud triangle is kind of incentives and opportunities and then rationalizing. And there are words that people are using that, from a pressure point of view, like meet target or you better make it, or, things like these phrases that people use. You could look through not only financial data, but also like email communications and other, web searches and such. But then, from an opportunity perspective, you could say, they're never looking, or, these are all phrases that you could have that might highlight like an opportunity. And rationalization, might be something like, we'll reverse it next month, or, we'll cover that error next month, or, something like that. And it's more just sort of rationalizing and working off of it. So, what do you really need to do this type of search? You really need a word table, and then you need the table that's actually being searched, so that you can kind of look at both to try to analyze it. And I mean, obviously, like the general ledger data, is the table to search in this case, because that's what we're talking about here. So let me kind of open up this keyword, analytic. So, trying to show some of these concepts to you, and we, between AuditNet and myself, there's a lot coming in this area. I mean, one thing I just want to quickly, definitely highlight, and I know we'll talk about it towards the end as well again, but there is a survey that AuditNet has out on the web related to keyword analytics, and if you click there, it kind of brings you into being able to read more and then take the actual survey. But the key of that survey ultimately is to be able to get a big list of words that we can analyze and play with, and what we're trying to do is to come up with some of the top words based on that analytic. Now, based on the survey, excuse me, and pulling them all together. Now, how would you do this analysis? What I find is you tend to have, I don't know if I have that here yet, you have like a description field, and I think I'd broken this out, but we'll just kind of put it all back together again. To increase revenues, okay, so now that I have this data field here and it's sort of broken up by spaces, one quick way is to go text to columns, just for that data field, and you can say delimited and do it more at a space kind of level, and that would then break it up, into the various components which we did above. So that's kind of like take a description field and break it up. Once you've done that, you're able to then have, having your list of keywords over on the left-hand side here, you're able to then kind of VLOOKUP to that data. Now, what is VLOOKUP? It's in essence a function that you're using here. Many of you probably have used this before, and it allows you to kind of look at the data field here, which is the word 1, the word 2, T-O, and then match that over to the keyword list. And that is the list that goes from A2 to A36, which is over here on the left-hand side. And that's kind of my keywords of weird stuff to look for. And then whenever there's a match, you'll get the word showing up in here. So in essence, you create like 10 columns of this. And the way it works is once you make one of these VLOOKUPs, and being very careful to have, as I bring up the screen here, sorry about that. Being very careful when you do this calculation. Notice how it has like dollar signs in there. The way to do that is if you hit your F4 button when you select the table array, it fixes that table array, so it won't move. But what's really nice is once you create one of these, you can copy and paste it as much as you'd like, and it basically will kind of stretch, like this formula will now be looking at that increase field, and this formula is looking at that one, and etc. So it's a great way of kind of breaking up the words and then doing a VLOOKUP across the words. Okay, so wanted to show you the keyword analytics, but let's now jump into our next polling question. We're due. And what is the function to test the round dollars and amounts? Is it left, mod, trim, or round? This is a great time for questions if you have any as well. And just noting here with the keyword analytics, excuse me, the keyword analytic webinar that's coming up, we'll be going through in much more detail and giving out lots of free tools and such on how to do this stuff, and I think you'll like it. I mean, I think it's something where I really urge everyone to take a look at that. And those that are taking the survey can go to the webinar for free. So it's definitely something to take advantage of. It's in December, and we'll be talking about it at the end. What I like about it is we will be talking about how to do a keyword analytics search and a word summary within all these different types of products. And we'll be showing that. But again, just noting that. And I got one question coming in. What is the best source for keyword analytics? And this is kind of the interesting thing. What Jim and I had noticed so this is one of the questions, is that a lot of the big four have these data lists, and the FBI has a data list of keywords, but they're not really willing to share it, given it is something proprietary, and also I think maybe it's against national security or something. But with that said, the survey that we're pulling together with AuditNet has, I believe we have about 3,000 words so far, but about 1,500 that are unique, and I know it's growing every day. Like every day I talk to Jim, it's gone up another 20 people answering the survey. So we're really getting there, and what we're trying to do is actually align the words to different types of frauds. So words around revenue fraud might be totally different than words around FCPA violations. So, you want to kind of pick a peer group of words. But hopefully this list that we're coming up with as part of the survey, it's all free if you take the survey, will be that good source for you. Because, right now it's very difficult to find it on the web.
Yeah, Rich, if I could just chime in here. We did attempt to get the list from the FBI, and they said that if they provided the list to us, it would be so redacted that it would just it wouldn't be worth sending to us. And I'm not exactly sure what the concerns are with the list, because if you go out to the web and you look for keyword list, you will find that DEA has lists out there. And I believe that the SEC has lists out there for words that are focused on national security issues. But this is, it's totally unrelated. This is not a national security issue. The keyword analytics that were pulled together for the FBI and by E&Y were basically for fraud and keyword analytics for the Fraud Triangle and Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So, I'm not exactly sure what the issue is in sharing that information, because it seems to me that would be something that that should be available to all professionals. And that was the reason why Rich and I, decided to move forward with the survey and the webinar. Was we felt that auditors were already doing some of this, and they'd be willing to share, and we could then provide what the FBI and EY was not willing to provide or share. That's my 2 cents, and I'm sticking by it.
No, thanks, Jim. Yeah, no, it's great, and yeah, I do find. Let me apologize. Let me kind of close this poll and get back to our screen and all that.
We do have 300. We do have 366 responses so far to the survey. So if you haven't taken the survey yet, just go out to the AuditNet site, and we've just posted a YouTube video that Rich put together, and giving more information on this.
So. No, thanks again, Jim. Yeah, I mean, I'm really trying to stretch my knowledge there on keyword analytics, and just while we're here, I mean, just for 1 second, I'll kind of jump a little bit off point, but I just wanted to show you, we're even going to talk about things like wordles, and this is something where you can. This is actually every word that's in the list. Uniquely, so gift and cheat and error, each one of those words. When you look at this, oops, sorry. Let me hide the polling question. Sorry. When you take a look at your screen here, you'll see this kind of funny-looking, picture. And it has all these words in it. And again, that's 1,500 words, and it's called a Wordle. You could go to wordle.net and make your own, of whatever you'd like. What I also find interesting from a big data point of view, and I'm going to say it, but I almost don't know if it's like legal, and Jim might be able to help me here. I've been downloading dictionaries, from the web. Like, you can actually download the English dictionary, like every word that's in the dictionary. It's just they give it to you like a list, 150,000 words. whereas some people have said that there's like 1,000,000 words in our in English language, you could again, this is like, it's based on like 150,000 base words is what they've kind of said. So drive becomes drives, and that kind of thing. But it's all based on the premise of drive. With that said, there's a lot of analytics there from a big data point of view of just taking all the words that exist in the world and relating it to your general ledger data analytic list and seeing like what are words that are popping out that aren't even in the dictionary, just for fun, like a big data kind of question. It probably is a lot of cryptic kind of things that the accounting people put in there so that they know what these entries are. But again, not to dwell on this topic, but it's a really interesting one and something that is growing by the day. Is literally, as Jim tells me, more people signing up, it tends to be growing. So, okay, well, moving onward, I wanted to talk about taking a look at account patterns, so patterns that are happening in your journal entry data. And there's a lot of different ways to do this test. I'm giving you one that's a little more complex, and I pray I don't lose you in the next minute or two here. But I was just going to spend about 5 or 10 minutes, talking about this concept, and note that at the end that there are ways to kind of learn more about it, because I find it's more, in my opinion, it's a way more advanced topic. So let me just say that. Okay, with that said, one of the things, so this is a new data file. You will be getting this data file, and you'll be able to kind of go through it again and again if you'd like. One of the things that you could do in a pivot table, and I'm just going to create a pivot table of this journal entry data. I'm going to put in my rows the journal entries, and in the columns I'm going to put the account numbers. And the goal of doing that is to try to make a kind of like a sequence of the journal entries, and really in a simple way. I shouldn't have summarized that. Let's see how long this takes. But my goal here really was to kind of figure out, what are so that's good. It came up with the count, which is really quite nice. What you could do, conceivably, is you could take, I'm sorry as I scroll out really far and it's really hard to see. I'm doing it on purpose. Take a look at this. You could almost see how the accounts are now at the top and they go across for long, probably long patterns of time kind of thing. One of the things that you could do, and I talked about a left function, you might be able to kind of take the left of the account number as one example and just summarize on that. So that way, if revenue accounts start with a 4 and, expense accounts start with a 5, that can be kind of a smaller, instead of having this grow to great, lengths, you could kind of bring it back to a much smaller kind of length. But what I'm trying to get at the point here is getting at account sequencing. So let me try to copy and paste this to a new file here, and I don't know if it's going to let me. So, yep, there it is. So if I copy and paste that, I'm just going to kind of create a whole new spreadsheet for this and just keep this simple for our purposes. What you now have is kind of a listing of all of these journal entries kind of listed out to the right. Now, what I'd like to be able to do, and it is a little hard, to do the way we have it right now, is to be able to summarize now this file so that I can find out how many journal entries have a debit how many journal entries have a debit posting to say the account 10/130 and a credit posting to some other account over here on the way right. I think it's a 2 account way over here, so this 2010, so or 2010. So it's kind of like, how many journal entries look like that? And I mean, quite frankly, if you have tools like ACL and IDEA and others, you might be able to do this, but the problem is, notice here there's so many columns. I mean, it goes on and on to the right there, that you might kind of max out even that product, in columns. So what I found, like I tried doing this first, when I was trying to do this test, and I said, that doesn't work really. Okay, so what did I do then? Let me just delete this. What I then did was I summarized each journal entry, and in this sorry, bear with me one second here. So I took the journal entries, and I basically kind of, in essence, summarized based on the journal entry number and the account. So you have kind of a summary here. And notice here, this isn't a pivot table. This is an actual data file. Then what I did was I took out all of the credit items and I put them to themselves. And I kind of have, you'll see over here, a line and a type. What we ended up doing was taking a look for kind of each item in this journal entry item. We then looked at what was the line number for that journal entry number, and that kind of brought us over here to the sum of credits. Let me get rid of that filter. So notice here, journal entry 1 only had 1 credit to it, so it had a credit line of 1, whereas journal entry, 10,000 had 3 lines in it. So therefore, it has 3 postings or 3 credit lines, and what we ended up doing here is just kind of figuring out the line number. Now the line number is calculated based on this if statement. So again, follow, if you don't mind, as you come back to this file, kind of look back into how we got to the if statement for the line number, etc. Because this is a hard concept, and it's something where it takes a little bit longer to learn. But yet I wanted to show it to you and kind of give you this concept. What you can then do, and this is something that, there's probably a way to do it in other tools, but I've been doing this in Active Data, and that's to figure out the top and bottom items. So you can basically say, I want to look at the top and bottom items, and this is, I actually wanted to know it, I want to group it by journal entry number. And I basically want, of the account number, I want the first 10 postings, and I want the bottom items because I want actually so this would be of the line number. Sorry about that. So you do it of the line number. So what I'm trying to say here is, by journal entry, I want the bottom line numbers, which would be 1 through 10 for each journal entry, and you click Finished, and it then gives you that bottom 10. So that the bottom 10 is what I had over here as well. And you'll notice ones that have like 3 lines in them are there. Now you do the same thing for the debits. So I did that over here for the debits as well, where we summarize the debits and we figure out the 10 for the debit. Sorry, so we do like the bottom 10 for the debits as well. And I copied and pasted all that stuff into this one file. I just literally took the top 10 credits and the bottom 10 credits and the bottom 10 debits, line numbers, and I put them into this file. And what was always interesting to me, no matter what journal entry system I'm looking at, is that most companies only when they have a journal entry, there's only 2 postings, debit, credit, or maybe 3 debits, 2 credits, but they're very few. It's amazing how many journal entries are just 2 items in the data. But with that said, and that kind of follows when you look at this data as well, but now that you have this, and it's, instead of it, remember how before we had all the account numbers going in columns and it went out for maybe 100 columns. Now I've kind of scoped it down to 10. So it can't really go much more, and I have 10 credits and 10 debits. So there's only 20 columns now. That I stop at 10. And the reason I stopped at 10 again is because most journal entries don't go beyond 10. But okay, with that, I then pivot that activity. Notice the 10 credits, 10 debits, and then that allows me to actually figure out. Let me kind of get it to kind of a summary of all this. What I was able to kind of figure out is that how many entries do I have? Let me just get rid of that. How many entries do I have that have a certain sequence to them? So now that I have the top 10 credits and the top 10 debits lined up here, now that I've kind of summarized that, in this summary here, you can actually then see that we had 450 journal entries that had a debit over here and 1 credit over there. We had 427, that had a debit here and a credit there, and you in essence can kind of see the pattern of the journal entry. And as I said, there are very few that go on for 10 accounts, 10 credits or 10 debits. Most of them, like in this case, you'll see this 1 debit and then a bunch of credits to the right. The reason I do this is it's really interesting to then look at this count. and see, okay, this is a very repetitive entry based on the accounts that are being used within that entry. And then way down here, these are entries that happen once. And here's one that well, I don't know, whichever one is a large one, we want to look at those, very large ones that are unique. So this allows you to find unique journal entries that are more based on the account sequence that's being used versus, just debits and credits and such. And I did want to show that as well to you. So I apologize, it's a little more complex. Do urge you to take a look at the file, and the way that file works, you'll see how the tabs kind of work to the right. So as you kind of go to the right, the system builds itself basically. So at the end, you end up with quite a bit of information that's useful. Okay. Now, I wanted to touch on graphing and scoring, as we sort of close out the morning or now afternoon for us. And, in looking at graphing and scoring, I think we've done a lot of graphing already. So I mean, generally speaking, I wanted to kind of note that the pivot chart is really a great way to get a lot done and not really have to know what you're doing. I mean, it's something where you can, kind of just click on a button and it gives you a final result. We talked about grouping on date ranges, and I did want to mention that again because I think that that's a very useful way of kind of summarizing things. I also, one thing that I really like a lot, and I'm going to, I have something ready to kind of go, and hopefully it'll work for us, is a scatter graph where you're looking at differences in the time frames. And what I wanted to show you here is from an account point of view, like if each one of these dots on the board here was an account, a general ledger account, what I want to look at is the difference in the account from a change point of view between 2013 and 2012, let's say. And that difference is going to be in a value perspective, which is on the horizontal axis, and then a volume perspective. So value is horizontal, volume is vertical. And, so we'll look at both perspectives. So I wanted to kind of jump, I think we did enough on the general kind of charting, but I wanted to kind of jump in now and show you this scatter graph, so just bear with me 1 second here. So, hopefully you're getting better at pivot tables, because I built this one and figured we'd just use it for our purposes. I think what I'll do, just to keep this a little simple here, is we're just going to kind of go off of the sum of debit amount and the count of debit amount. And the way they've lined these up I don't like, so I'm just going to well, yeah, no, actually this should work out quite well. So what I'm going to do is I kind of just did a summary by year of the value by year and the count by year for the debits. And again, just to kind of give you a relatively simple example, but show you how the scatter difference works. What I want to do is then paste this data, but it's not going to let me. Hold on 1 second. So I'm just going to take 2013 and 14 from a count and a volume perspective. I was hoping not. Let me try to get the whole thing, and then let me bring that over here. Hold on. So I built that pivot, copying and pasting that data, and I have my values here. 2014 minus 13, and then my count 14 minus 13. Let me kind of just over here, I'm going to say value difference, and over here I'm going to call this volume, whoops, volume difference. And the value difference is 2014 minus 13, and the volume difference, whoops, is 2014 minus 13. Okay, and we're going to just try to copy that down. Just give me 1 more second here. Okay. Let me try to double click there. Well, that kind of works. So that was good. Okay, so we have our value difference and volume difference now, then calculated. What you can do is highlight that data and then create a scatter graph of that data, just very kind of simply here. And what that's doing, and again, this is sample data, haven't tried it before, but I wanted to show you how to build the scatter. It looks like we have a lot more activity in 13 versus 12, or 14 versus 13. So it's kind of like a wide variance here, but it's still kind of interesting to look at how we have a lot less activity and from a volume point of view in many cases in some of the accounts, but yet we have an increase in value. So we have this less activity but lots more money in this account. Less volume and then more activity. What's interesting is we don't have any positive volume, but that's because I have sample data and it's not the best for this purpose. But hopefully you can kind of see the variation of the volume value scatter, which I think is really kind of an interesting tool, and in your real data will work a lot better. From a dashboarding point of view, what I found is that I like to build a lot of different charts within Excel. And whenever you create a chart in Excel, let's just head back here. I had the option of kind of throwing this to another sheet, but you have the ability to kind of you can kind of move this back to a sheet. I believe it's funny. We'll kind of move it back to here or something, and you can actually have various charts, even in this case within charts, or have a chart as I had in the slide here that's part of an Excel document. So you can actually just have little Excel charts that are kind of set here but based on data files that are within the worksheet itself. And I like to do this because it allows you to kind of dashboard quite a bit in one place. All right, with that said, let me kind of jump into the next polling question because I know it's time for that. What pivot table function is used to create a chart? Is it a pivot data, group date, pivot chart, or line chart? So, one of the questions I have while you're answering the poll question, what type of, what have you seen after an internal art group shares these tests with the accounting? Did they not use it, or did they have to change tests because they now know where internal audit's working? What I found was in both cases that I've done this so far, there was a fraud within the organization, so everyone is a little bit concerned, and it became more of a team effort to find fraud. I will say that the accounting reviewer was different than the accounting, the person that was running this test was running it on data that was not theirs. So it wasn't like they were posting this data. This is stuff that they were looking at other locations, and they were more in a director role kind of reviewing it. And maybe that's a good setup. It's kind of like, what do you review but you don't enter? Let's give you the reports for that, kind of thing. But I haven't really seen them have enough of a drive to, as far as I could tell, to take our tests and then commit fraud based on the tests, kind of thing. But with that said, not to say it couldn't happen, but is something that I haven't really seen yet. For the most part, they're pretty appreciative of it, and actually in a couple of cases it helped them to find some things that they weren't really fraud, but was more of a management of earnings at quarter end, and they were glad they found it, because that way they it's everyone knows what's going on. All right, well, let me just close this poll. I know we're going to leave open at the end for questions, and I just, in the interest of time, I want to make sure we get done it by 1 today. Sharing the poll there, pivot chart, correct. It's the way you basically make a graph out of the pivot table. So good going there. Okay, so I wanted to then dive a bit into coding and scoring. I've talked about it a bit before, but I think the more that you can summarize data and even go into your data file itself, hopefully everyone remembers where we did the round function today, and the mod function where it kind of calculated a round dollar amount. What I find is by coding your data like that, by adding the mod function of data, the weekday function, or even just saying, is this a revenue account, yes or no, and having that as a code field is a great way of summarizing your data. So that way you can start to very quickly strip out, I only want to look at expenses, I only want to look at revenue. One thing that I constantly calculate for every journal entry is what is the income statement impact, because a lot of financial people, that's all they care about. And from an audit point of view, it kind of, it sort of makes sense too that that's a big area of our focus. These are things that you can calculate, that you could put into the data itself and then start to, kind of analyze based on that. What is a transactional score? It's basically giving a score for a variety of reports that you're running on the data. So, who, what, when, where, why, all those reports that we ran, we then summarize that and organize that by journal entry. And we're going to try to show you how, to do that so that we can, you can do that yourself. The approach, from a benefits point of view, is I really find you find some of the best journal entries this way. It's kind of interesting to find a weekend journal entry, but it's really interesting to find a weekend journal entry that's a high dollar amount that was entered by a person that's never entered journal entries, all these different reports that you run. If you can combine them all together, you really can kill more birds with one stone. You could pick one sample unit item and, attack 20 different objectives as part of your audit, and that's kind of what we're trying to show here. Now, I'm going to get a little bit, mathematical towards the end here, and bear with me. Hopefully, I'll be able to do this, well enough. But the goal here is to say, well, if a score, because the scores are kind of close, a lot of them get really close together. Standard deviation allows you to really quickly pick out scores that are way off and ones that are not. And what I find is calculating a z-score is also really useful as well. So let's kind of let me. Oh, actually, I'll show you this last bit here. Our goal here is to kind of calculate the percentile to see what is the z-score, and where does that score fit in the percentile of the entire universe of scores, and that's kind of what we're going to be calculating. What's really cool, these are all the functions that come with Excel, and they really make it a lot easier to run. I'm going to show you a hard calculation that you end up just putting in a function and it does it. And the way that we put it all together is VLOOKUP. And I know we've done VLOOKUP already today, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but it gives you an idea, how do we do this? We're just going to VLOOKUP everything together. And last but not least, just for this part of this section here, is the result is a sampling methodology that's it's based on risk on how you define it. So you could define risk based on 10 reports that you like the most. That's now risk to you, and that's what you're going to take a look at. So in looking at how to do this, let's just take a look at our final Excel file of the day. And what I wanted to show here is just kind of scroll back a little bit. We have a lot of VLOOKUPs in this tab that you will be getting. And what I did here is let me just kind of drag this to the end, sorry, call that z-score. That was a little sloppy, sorry about that. Wanted to make sure you had the right tab there. But what I've done here is I've pulled together into this one top-weighted page all of the different scores associated with a journal entry. For that journal entry number, not supplier number, we took this from the AP section. For that journal entry number, does it show up on each one of these reports? So you can go to sheet 1, which is report 1, and do a VLOOKUP to here, and then carry over column 2, which would be the score. And what's kind of cool about this is you can score, if you had, let's say, 7 reports that you were running, you could score report 5 with a 0.2 and report 7 as a 0.15 because they may have more relevance for risk than a 0.1 to you. So that's kind of the differential of percentages there. Okay, ultimately, we're then kind of combining back that score, and let me just double click on this so you see it. We have a VLOOKUP of journal entry number 2. We go to sheet 2, which is report 2, and then we're kind of looking at the entire report 2 and bringing over the score if it's there. So we go over to that sheet 2, which is report 2, and grab it. So again, report 3 would go to sheet 3, and if you put all this together, and even in Excel, you know, report 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're all kind of laid out here, you can make this like summary lead sheet that then has the final score calc over on the left-hand side. Just to get to the z-score, you know, just in the final minutes here, and what's kind of neat about this is if you have that score, this goes through this wonderful calculation of taking the mean of that score, figuring out what is the difference to that of the score to the mean. The mean is up here, C4, which is basically the total score divided by the total observations, gets you that 12.3. That's added all the way down here. And then you get the difference to the mean that you then square, and then, you know, et cetera. But and then you divide that by the standard deviation percentage, F4, to then get the z-score and et cetera. But what I really liked was that at the end of the day, forget all that stuff. What you really all need to do is to, you know, just if you can just get to the z-score calculation, which I'm pretty sure is the standardized formula. So, you know, forget, this is all the math that, you know, you could learn if you want to, and things like Khan Academy, etc., are really good for this type of thing, if you've ever seen that on the web. But then the z-score formula is just using standardize. You know, so you basically say standardize A8. Let me just double click on this. So it says standardize A8, which is 14, depending on the mean, which is 12.3, and then divide that by the standard deviation of that mean, which is up here at that 4.82. So, you know, those three kind of fields get put together. You know, how did I get the standard deviation? Again, it's standard dev, like standard dev, and it's from A8 to A2599. So let me just double click on that so you see it. Whoops. Okay, so it's highlighting that entire column A. You know, so that's kind of standard deviation, the z-score formula. Why am I doing all this? So then I can calculate a normal distribution, which tells you the percentile. So basically 16.2, let me just kind of give you an example here. If you have a 16.2, you're making up at least 79% of the population. Like there's that many more scores that are below you at that point in the scoring range. And what you're looking for are percentiles that are the highest, you know, so ones that are, you know, 80, 90, 100%. Those are the ones like this 100% here and that 88% there. Those are the ones that have the most percentile. And what I find is you could just look by score and sort it high to low for sure. But I like looking at the percentile because it gives me more of a perspective. You know, like this is really low, and this one's, you know, it's getting there. It's kind of high. You know, this one's getting there, 79%. That's kind of high. But then as you get up into the 90s and hundreds, that's really where you should be focusing, right? So I like z-score. It's another way of kind of taking scores and, you know, going one step further with a z-score of your score. But again, did want to show you that as well. So let me kind of get to this last polling question, and then we'll, you know, obviously have just kind of some closing words and other things to talk about. But what function is used mainly to align all of the spreadsheets together so that you can calculate a score? Is it mod, find, mid, or VLOOKUP? And this is a great time to kind of ask any final questions. We're about 6 minutes away from the end, and we really just had more or less closing remarks, talking about some of the files and videos and such that you'll get. as well as the survey, the free survey and webinar that we have that we do hope you take a part in. So I see many of you have voted. Again, from a questions point of view, if you want to throw them in as well, I'll try to keep this open just for a minute or two as we're going here, and then we'll close it out. But we're on time today. Let me make sure I've gotten all of them. So, the last one, would the last analytic tell us what journals to turn our focus to? Absolutely. And then the next one, let me just go on this first question. Would this last analytic, the Z-score, and the scoring, tell us which journals to focus on? Yes, and I find it's a much better way of finding them, because you really get lost in all these reports, and by scoring it's a way of kind of pulling it all back together into one score. And if you Z-score it and do that percentile thing that I was talking about, it even makes it easier to kind of see where things lie out there. So yeah, no, I think I find scoring, I mean, it's why your credit card company calls you up and says, you've been making weird transactions, we wanted to call you up. What do you recommend as next steps to getting deeper learning of applying Excel analytics? We have a lot out there, obviously, in our webinars that we have, but we have a free website as well, auditsoftwarevideos.com, that provides probably about 20 hours of Excel videos in analytics and pivot tables and graphing, some general ledger tests, a lot of other types of tests, but it really gets you the concepts down. I find MrExcel.com is another good one, but let me close this poll so we can actually finish up on the slides here and share that. Most of you had voted, 96% of you. VLOOKUP is the function that's used to kind of bring together the scorings. And yeah, I mean, just again, kind of getting back to my slides here. I'm going to leave this last slide in here, kind of key mantras of general ledger analytics. And, I do just a note here. I mean, I think the more you can get the data from the externals or just for yourself and analyze the entire company, it really is like the lifeblood of the company. I mean, you really can learn a lot. You can save a lot of money. Hopefully, identify some process issues. You can identify fraud. It has happened. I've done it, but it doesn't happen that much. I usually find a lot of kind of sort of like mismanagement or just where people didn't realize things were being processed that way. Obviously questions. Oh, I'm sorry. So the poll is not hidden. Apologize. Thank you for that. So just going back to that final slide, which is in your slides as well. Excuse me, on just the key mantras of GL Analytics, which you'll see there now. And just continuing on here, obviously if you have any questions, feel free to post them. Just taking a look, these are ones that are in the queue. Obviously we're at the October 7th one, but many more coming up in the coming month or so. And we're capping it off with that right now, or at least I'm capping it off with this December 3rd keyword analysis of organizations' big data for error and fraud detection. This is the link to the survey. There is this free webinar devoted to it. You can get there through AuditNet, as we showed you before. It's a lot easier. Just a couple other last notes here. Active data for Excel, which I showed you today, it does a lot of cool stuff. I mean, we really, I think I only showed one or two items, and there is, through that link, an ability to get the product at a much greater discount, so do take part in that. And Audit Software Videos, another website that hopefully you can find some value in. I'm just bringing it over here so you can see it real quick. you can either log in or you can register here and just register for the training. And once you're in, you can take a look at courses in ACL, Excel, Access, Active Data for Excel, IDEA. And right now, all this stuff is free. We do have some data files that we sell as part of this, but you can still learn a lot without the data files. You can take a look at it. Is there an annual fee for Active Data, or is it a one-time fee? Not to talk pricing too much, but it is a one-time fee. Top Cats is more of a subscription basis, I believe, but I know that Active Data is a one-time fee. We do thank you for today. I know I'm bumping up on the 1 o'clock. I hate to go over by too many minutes here, but wanted to pack it all in and tried to get you a lot there. And hope you enjoyed the presentation today. We really urge you to take that survey with regards to the webinar for keywords, because it is free and then gets you into the webinar for free. And any words that you can find, if people out there can share them with us, like Jim just mentioned the DEA today and the SEC list, which I didn't even know existed, so that's awesome, and I'm going to start Googling that because I do find that's a really useful tool to have, and the more words we can get, the more we can start kind of breaking them up into different pieces.
Yeah, Rich, just a caveat on those lists that I mentioned. They're more focused on national security issues and terrorism and things like that than they would be on fraud and Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So I'm not sure if they would be valuable, but it's just it portrays the point that basically those lists are made public, whereas the ones that the FBI and E&Y are not made public, and I just don't understand why, other than proprietary information, and also the fact that the Big Four can charge a fee for those. So.
Yeah, I agreed. I mean, what I was finding is a lot of my clients were coming to me saying, "Hey, do you have a list of keywords?" And I said, "No." I had a list of like 200, but I didn't have a list of 1,500, kind of thing. And yeah, no, agreed that was the impetus of all this in a way so this is great, and it's a great free sharing. You'll get the list of keywords, and we're trying our best to even to break it up into different languages. We wherever people have helped us kind of do that, we're even trying to get it into different languages.
And as an added bonus to that, Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, but you and Steve have been developing some tools that basically, will be useful in gathering keywords for the organizations as well.
Yeah, I mean, tools like Active Data have even built it in, and Arbutus and ACL, they and IDEA, they've built a lot of this stuff in, and we're actually going to, giving away like Excel tools that like you click a button and the macro will kind of do an analysis and a keyword type analysis for you. There's scripts that we're going to give out for ACL that does like a summarization of all the words within a file. And I'll just note here, I mean, for to the points of word reviews, you can actually just look at why certain words are happening a lot, and that helps you to understand the transactions. Forgetting looking for fraud words, you can just look for like what's happening in the data, and it gives you this different perspective. Very similar to looking at it by day or by amount.
Absolutely, and we could go on and on with this for another 25, 30 minutes. And in the interest of time, though, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today, and thank you, Rich, for putting on a great presentation. And we look forward to your taking the survey and joining us for another webinar in the future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jim.
Bye.